So Itauma believes speed proves superiority. Hrgovic believes experience exposes shortcuts. Simple, dangerous, unproven, because one man is trusting the maths, while the other is preparing for the moment the maths stop working. But what happens if Itauma can't end it early? So in the face-off between Itauma and Filip Hrgovic, there was some interesting dialogue. So let's explore some of this conversation and bring some perspective and understanding. So initially in the conversation, there was what we call the transitive property fallacy. Let me explain. So Itauma spoke about stopping Dempsey McKean in round 1 and Hrgovic went 11 rounds. So based on this premise, Itauma is leaning on the maths that he is the better fighter, the more accomplished fighter. Hrgovic naturally disagrees. But let's look into that. So Filip Hrgovic went 11 rounds with McKean, and Itauma went 1 round, and it was a brutal finish. I think it's important to remember that this is not conclusive proof for a variety of reasons. The first thing is that styles make fights. But the second premise is that the McKean that fought Filip Hrgovic may not be the same McKean that fought Itauma. So this represents a subjective truth, not an objective truth. So this doesn't necessarily mean that Itauma is superior. And then we move on to the next element of the discussion, which is that styles make fights. And this is Hrgovic's core defense. An early ko, according to him, proves a shot, not class. So his question to Itauma is what happens when you don't get the first round stoppage? So we've got 2 things here. The styles make fights, and what happens if he doesn't get the first round stoppage? Let's begin with the styles make fights. And let's go back historically to the great Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, and George Foreman. All of those fighters are great. So when Muhammad Ali fought Joe Frazier the first time, he lost in a sensational fight. But when George Foreman fought Joe Frazier, he knocked out Joe Frazier in 2 rounds. Dominant, sensational performance. But when Ali fought George Foreman, Ali won in the 8th round in the epic Rumble in the Jungle. That in itself shows that styles make fights. So, and I don't want to create an incorrect narrative bias here, but we can't take fights from the past as objective truth. They might be a good reference point, but they're not exactly the objective truth because every fight has different variables. Like I said, maybe the McKean that fought Filip Hrgovic was a better fighter than the McKean that fought Itauma because maybe he was more prepared, maybe he wasn't more prepared. Maybe he had an injury, etc. And then adding to this, we have what some would call excuses from Hrgovic, or some may refer to as rational reasons for the performance. Again, we're still on the McKean performance. So according to Hrgovic, his 1-year layoff, McKean's holding, and a passive referee were contributive factors to the performance. Is this a lack of accountability? Or is this just the variables that happened? Or perhaps it's a combination of both. With regards to McKean's holding, I would state that holding is used strategically in boxing, particularly on the higher level. But you, as a boxer, need to be prepared, especially as an elite boxer, to be able to handle that strategy. So if an opponent brings that strategy to the ring, it is your responsibility to deal with that strategy. A passive ref, again, refs, if we accept the premise that a ref can have an influence on the match, it is still your accountability to ensure that you can do what you can do so the ref can have an influence on the match, but ultimately you have a bigger influence on the match. So I guess there's a middle point where you can accept that maybe there was poor refereeing, but at the same time, you have to also accept your performance. So there's a few things here. Is it lack of accountability? Only Hrgovic will know that. However, objectively, a 1-year layoff, strategic holding, and a passive referee, if we accept that premise, then that could be a significant factor. My counter argument would be to Hrgovic is that you have to make those adjustments quicker. And what would happen if you had another passive referee? What happens if you have a passive referee against Moses Itauma? Would you blame your performance on the referee, or will you have the tools to be able to deal with that situation? And again, we're still talking about McKean. The whole conversation centers around McKean. And then we have this interesting narrative framing of good shot versus good performance. So Hrgovic now has reframed the McKean Co as one clean punch in 60 seconds, not a full performance. And for me, I feel like this is minimizing the performance, but this is like a Machiavellian move. This is something to bother someone, to basically take away the credit of their performance, to annoy an opponent. So it's an interesting psychological move from Filip Hrgovic. And, I think objectively it was a great performance. The reason it was only one round is because Moses Itauma ended the fight in one round. What might be interesting here is how good was that McKean that turned up into the ring? How good was he? How prepared was he? And also, considering how concussive the performance was, when we look at Filip Hrgovic's power and Moses Itauma's power, who hits harder? And then we move to the durability question. What happens? What happens when Moses Itauma gets tired? What happens when he takes a clean shot to the head or to the body? And that is a good question. And how good is Moses Itauma's stamina? Does he know how good his stamina is? Does he have questions about his stamina? And how well does Moses Itauma take a body shot? How well has he taken body shots in sparring? How well has he taken body shots in the gym? And how well does he take a headshot? And will Filip Hrgovic be able to land those headshots? Will he be able to land shots to the head and body to answer those questions and to create that type of impact? And finally, Hrgovic claims that Franklin was a little bit fat and out of shape against Moses Itauma as compared to when he fought White and Joshua. So again, this is preemptive. It's a psychological move, devaluing Moses Itauma's resume. But here's the thing. Does fat mean out of boxing shape? Think about that. Does fat mean out of boxing shape? Here's a counter argument. Tyson Fury, many people would consider him fat, but he's mostly, when he steps in the ring, he's in boxing shape. George Foreman, many people would consider him fat, but again, he's in boxing shape for his particular style. So the notion that Franklin was fat and out of boxing shape is not necessarily untrue, but it's not necessarily true either. So this is my final statement. Think of this. Moses Itauma has shown speed, he's shown power, and he's shown destruction. But Hrgovic, he represents something far more complicated. And part of that complication is uncertainty. Because we don't know how Moses Itauma reacts if the knockout doesn't come. What happens if the referee starts to frustrate him? What happens if his body gets tested? When a veteran refuses to disappear, what happens then? Now, McKean may be part of the evidence, but it is not an objective truth. Boxing is not so simple, because boxing is about adaptation, durability, and problem solving. Moses Itauma may be the future, but Hrgovic is the question he has never been forced to answer before. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community, and that means I'm interested in your thoughts, I'm interested in your perspectives, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, press like, hype, and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.